This video is made in thanks to my Kickstarter backer, Mary. Thank you so much for helping me get my most recent book out. Did you know that hat pins were a fleeting but notable weapon? Well, they were, and for a very specific user group. This was women, and at a specific time in history when their role in society was going through a fundamental change. You take that along with the confluence of fashion leading to the use of this kind of a thing, and you get the recipe for hat pins as self-defense implements. This started in the late Victorian era, when women wore very elaborate hats like this. But to keep something like this in place, you needed a nice long sharp hat pin, because it could go through both hat and hair. But the 1920s came along, fashion changed considerably, women either stopped wearing hats or wore ones like we're seeing here that you can just put on top of your head. And that finished off the run of the hat pin, which had begun to decline in use around the time of World War I. In this old advert, you'll notice that the description says all of these hat pins are 6 inches long. Well, a 6-inch long needle can definitely cause some pain, and they got longer than that. The average length was probably longer, and sometimes they were up to a foot. But now let's layer in that societal change that we talked about. A combination of the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and just economics led to many more women getting out into the working world than previously. Notice in this picture the satirization, where the man is kind of in the traditional woman's role and vice versa. She's home from work. But the real kicker here was that if a woman was going to go to a job, she, when at a factory somewhere else in the city, she was going to go there by herself. Her husband, if she had one, wasn't going to be free to walk her there and back because he had his own job. And if she was single but working, then she's definitely going out and about on her own. And sticking with the unmarried example, this could involve living on your own, renting a room somewhere. All of this was pretty new in society at large at the time. And funny enough, I was reading about it in this book here. This is about the infamous H.H. Holmes murders, the serial killer from Chicago. And he preyed on single, unattached women who were moving into the big city looking for work. Murder, luckily at least, wasn't the most common danger facing women at the time. Harassment was. And the men who harassed, groped, or attacked a woman who was out on her own was known as a masher. And so women had to navigate this danger as they went on their way. And these new, big, and exploding cities were fertile ground for this danger because people are packed out on the streets, you've got to get into streetcars and trains, that kind of a thing. And I imagine you can guess where we're going with all this. What object did a woman have on her if she needed to fend off a masher? Well, the most convenient option was the hat pin. One quick yank and it was out of your hat, out of your hair, and in your hand. And thus a brief but interesting Western self-defense tactic was born, as seen here. Now, to make a video on this subject, do you have to order an antique hat pin? No. Did I? Yes. And this one's shorter than average, but the long ones and more ornate ones are kind of expensive, as you can imagine. At heart, these things were just needles. Not a lot of great opportunities for solid grip in a fight. If you were lucky, the decorative portion would give you something to maybe get a little bit more of a hold of, like this. Ours is fabric, but most of them were more solid. Probably one of the least effective weapons I've ever shown on the channel, but come to think of it, that actually depends on what we mean. If effective means putting someone down in a life and death struggle, then this is not it. If effective means making somebody say, ouch, and feeling acute pain and backing off, then it can do the job. And we know for a fact that it did. Here's one celebrated instance. We're looking at a young woman from Kansas who was touring New York City in 1903, Leotie Blaker. It was reported by the New York World that she was on a streetcar when a man got handsy, and she took care of the situation with her foot-long hat pin. She stuck him in the arm and was quoted as saying, "He was such a nice-looking old gentleman, I was sorry to hurt him. I've heard about Broadway mashers and L mashers, but I didn't know Fifth Avenue had a particular brand of its own. If New York women will tolerate mashing, Kansas girls will not." And of course, that was just one example. There were plenty of others. Around the same time, a St. Louis schoolteacher went straight for the face with her hat pin to dissuade her attacker. Now I'll read to you from the Lincoln Evening News, December 12th, 1904. A bold woman pickpocket was the cause of excitement in the store of the Jones Dry Goods Company. Let's skip up a little bit. The store was filled with Christmas shoppers. Mrs. Jessie Stewart, a detective employed by the company, which means like private security, was in the elevator, and the pickpocket selected her as a victim. She tried to remove a bag from the belt of the detective, and it was then that the trouble began. The two women struggled for supremacy, and the pickpocket jabbed Mrs. Stewart with a hat pin, inflicting painful but not serious wounds on her arms. When the elevator reached the first floor, the thief attempted to escape, and a wild scramble on the part of the spectators resulted. In the mix-up, toys and pretty Christmas goods were strewn about the floor. Women screamed, children cried, the salesgirls became hysterical from excitement, and the aisles became congested with the crowds attracted by the scuffle. During all the turmoil, Mrs. Stewart held fast to her prisoner. A floor walker attempted to assist her. The thief resumed her hat pin exercise, and the floor walker retired with a few punctures in his body as souvenirs for his gallant onslaught. Officer Metzinger of the Walnut Street Police Station finally entered the store in response to a call. The hat pin had no terrors for him. He seized the woman by the shoulders and soon had her under control. And quite a scene. I went into detail on that, one, because I just enjoyed, and two, it's atypical. It's not just the classic woman defending herself from a mugger or masher. Sometimes there were even woman versus woman, hat pin versus hat pin encounters. And so we can see this became a real go-to weapon, and that thereby led to the hat pin peril, as you see up above in the headline. So this was basically a backlash where people were worried about these women running around with their nice sharp needles. As you can see, the blurb under the headline reads, "Growing danger in city crowds," that places a startling list of accidents beside the long record of violent assaults committed with woman's deadly weapon. And I love the art. We've got a man impaled by a hat pin and a skull as a decoration on a pin. In 1910, the Chicago City Council thought about banning hat pins longer than 9 inches. One man said, "If women care to wear carrots and roosters on their heads, that is a matter for their own concern, but when it comes to wearing swords, they must be stopped." Meanwhile, a woman got up and spoke at that same meeting and said, "If the men of Chicago wanted to take the hat pins away from us, let them make the streets safe." In the same city and year, a woman wrote, "I always feel safe going home late at night with a hat pin available for protection. Before leaving a streetcar, I always carry a hat pin ready in my hand until I am safe within the door of my house." And she wrote that as part of the women's movement to fight back against the pending ordinance. And this, by the way, was taking place, this back and forth, in multiple countries. Plenty of evidence then that the hat pin as weapon wasn't just a thing, but a big thing. And the real martial arts nerds know that there was kind of a self-defense craze going on in society, Western society at this time, which included learning a bit of jiu-jitsu, using canes for the men, umbrellas for the women, all that good stuff. And if we really, really want to nerd out, we'll point out that in the Far East there was a somewhat similar practice. Traditional Japanese hairpins, so hair, not hat, were sometimes used and sometimes optimized for fighting purposes. Men and women did that in the Okinawan Islands. That's the birthplace of karate, and my karate sensei has taught us that some of the moves that we perform in katas are actually a reach back around your head for your hairpin moves, which of course lost that aspect a long time ago. But that is definitely out of scope for this video. Well, I guess not since I put it in, but you know what I mean. Once again, thanks very much to Mary for your help in getting my most recent book out, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that latter part applies to all the others who watched the video as well. Thanks.